Okay. I think it should be working. um,
Okay,
let's see if somebody can tell us if we're live. Julia, are you seeing us on Facebook?
I can also write down on Slack. But it says meeting is now live stream, so.
All right. Well, I'm going to assume it's working. So hello, everyone. This is Dr. Haider and Michelle. And today we're
Hi,
going to be
everyone.
talking about autophagy. And yeah, I can see us on Facebook. Okay, cool. Um, so yeah, I was thinking of covering some kind of like broad subject headings for autophagy. First of all, like what is autophagy and how to pronounce it? Actually, I don't really know. I think it's autophagy, maybe it's autophagy. So what is it, and you know, why you would want to do it, how to do it, and the things that can kind of trigger it, um, and then kind of like the ancestral perspective on it, like maybe the evolutionary slash ancestral perspective of why it, like a from a higher view, like why it kind of makes sense that it would be good for us, because of the way that evolutionary forces have interacted with our genome and our biology and our biochemistry, um, and so why there's kind of a mismatch with our biology and our genome and our biochemistry in the modern world, and why that is so bad for us. Um, and Michelle, were there any other kind of like high-level subject headings for this?
Um, no, I think that's it. Yeah, I mean, I have the three main ways kind of that can induce it. I'd say that's important, but those are the main things that I think we should talk about.
Okay. So I guess the subject headings weren't really in order there. I think like the place that we should start is probably like, what is it? And then I want to get into like the ancestral perspective. And then we can talk about, other things like why it's beneficial and how to induce it and stuff like that. So, I mean, the basically what it is, without getting really into the weeds, is that it's a process whereby our bodies clean up junk proteins and other, junk, intracellular junk. So our bodies are made up of cells, and those cells, as they go about their business, they create trash. Essentially, it's kind of like a city. Imagine your cell as a city, and somebody has to take out the trash. Like just normal day-to-day activities create a lot of junk and trash, and everyone in their little houses puts that trash into a trash bag and puts it on the corner of their driveway, and the dump truck comes up. So this is what autophagy is. There are these dump trucks in our cells, and phagosomes is what they're called, but it's basically just a little organelle that has that'll come along, and it'll kind of like eat up old pieces of your cell inside that aren't working as well anymore, or are broken completely, or outside trash like the S1 segment of the spike protein, the subunit of the spike protein that's in monocytes in long haulers. So this kind of phagosome will come along, eat it up, take it to a lysosome. So lysosomes are little organelles that have digestive enzymes inside them, and they'll digest the stuff, and destroy it, break it down to like its constituent parts, and then you can reuse those parts and make something useful out of them. So the building blocks of all these proteins can be reused, amino acids, stuff like that. Um, and so this is a process that happens more in younger people, and it kind of slows down as we age, and it's part of why we age, because it's slowing down and not happening as much. um, and it's triggered by it's, you can increase the amount of autophagy that's going on by doing different things, and a lot of kind of like the lifestyle things that people know that they should be doing will help to increase the amount of autophagy that's going on, and help you to, what we think it will help you extend your lifespan and health span, and it can help you to heal from chronic illness. So that's kind of that's kind of what it is, at a higher level. Michelle, do you have any words on that as well, like what it is and what's going on? I know you had mentioned something about a
Mm.
little bit more of the biochemistry before we started.
Yeah, well, the one interesting thing that I think that I came across is about the immunosenescent cells that autophagy kind of helps to get rid of. They're kind of immunosuppressant cells essentially, and there's just an interesting, that is one theory as to why it's older people who suffered a lot from COVID infections, and because they, as you said, as you age, you just have less autophagy, and then you have more of these cells in your body, and there have been correlations with the people in their 20s or 30s who were really ill or hospitalized with a higher number of these type of cells in their body. So yeah, that is interesting, and I think there is a way to test. I think it's the P16 enzyme. You can test your immunosenescent cell level to see kind of what's going on. Yeah, and that I guess that's an interesting piece in the context of COVID and long COVID.
So like we're talking about immune system cells, and then senescence is like aging, basically.
Yeah.
So these are like old, like cranky, like immune cells that aren't working as well as they should be, and they should be kind of like cleared out, destroyed, and like new cells should take their place. And if that's not happening, your immune system's not going to be working properly. So they're like very old immune cells that should really be destroyed and recycled, and new cells should be created. And so autophagy will help to accomplish that. And so that is important. So it's like immunosenescence in general is the gradual deterioration of the immune system that happens with aging. All right, so yeah, hopefully we've kind of given people an understanding of what it is. And unfortunately, we didn't answer the question of how to say it, but that's okay. I guess. I know it's either autophagy or autophagy. It's one of the two.
I've heard autophagy.
Yeah, so auto is self, and phagy is like, eating. So basically eating yourself. It sounds gross and disgusting, like a snake eating its own tail, but it's just, you're basically getting rid of the used up old stuff and recycling it and taking out the trash. So it's kind of like an internal recycling process. And it really is like your cells are probably far more complicated than a city, but that's one way to kind of like visualize it at a higher level. So let's talk about the kind of like the evolutionary ancestral perspective, like where we came from and why our bodies use this and why it's good for us, and just kind of like how it fits into that ancestral perspective. So what do you think about that, Michelle? Like, what's the ancestral perspective on this and where we came from and how we evolved?
Yeah, so while I was reading a bit about kind of just different theories on our diets, through the history of human evolution. And it's just, it's interesting from the perspective of diversity is one thing, but also, just this idea that like eating once or twice a day was kind of a common practice. And, remembering that I think 2 million years ago to 12,000 years ago was basically the Paleolithic era. And then from around 10,000 years, we move into the Neolithic, like the agricultural revolution is around 10,000 years. So, and then later on, it's the Industrial Revolution. But that period of time is just so big compared to this, start of the agricultural revolution until now. And yeah, I think that a lot of food anthropologists just had this idea that people would be eating one meal or two meals. So it's kind of almost similar actually to the 16-hour window of intermittent fasting that people commonly follow. Because if you can imagine, cavemen didn't have a way, like they weren't eating leftovers because they didn't have a fridge, and they didn't kind of like wake up and have cereal or whatever. It was mainly, waking up and moving on an empty stomach.
And going and finding the food that was fresh.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was only really in the Neolithic, the agricultural revolution, that we actually had access to food storage and ways to preserve. And then only then did people actually start eating 3 meals a day. But it is interesting because even during that time, there's some interesting statistics about how people got shorter. there were a lot more nutrient deficiencies because it's thought that the Paleolithic people would eat around 20 to 25 different plant species a day, which is this huge variety, compared to what we ate now. And then obviously during agricultural time, it's very much, rice or cassava or, just farming fewer things and just repeating those. So that's also a big change. So I think, yeah, the intermittent fasting model kind of is more similar to that Paleolithic time where we would kind of wake up and move on an empty stomach. And it's interesting because kind of the three ways of inducing autophagy is fasting, being in ketosis, because it's a type of starvation in a way, you're starving yourself of glucose, and exercise. Those are the three main ways to kind of stimulate autophagy. And that's what people would naturally do in the morning. You'd wake up, move, fasted, and probably be in ketosis until you found food. So it kind of makes sense from that perspective, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That's really great context because yeah, I've heard this too, that people used to eat once or twice a day, and I never really thought about it in terms of the fact that, like, our early ancestors had no food storage and they ate everything fresh, and they basically finished it and or threw it to the dogs or something, or it just rotted, and they wouldn't come back and eat. They couldn't eat something for breakfast. It was impossible, right? Like
Yeah.
at best it would be like brunch. It would be like a late breakfast or like an early lunch or something, and they had to go and gather it and kill it or whatever and prepare it and then eat it. So that's fascinating. Yeah, so yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
cool point. It really makes sense that so if human beings were doing that for like vast spans of time, like our bodies would have kind of like become, that would have become kind of the ideal environment that our bodies are like micro evolving towards, right? So it kind of makes sense that that would be kind of the ideal like situation for us, and our bodies would be designed or would have become designed over time to benefit the most from that kind of lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Where you're waking up and you're exercising in a fasted state, and then you eat food, and you just don't have time in the day because to eat food three times when you had to go and catch it in the morning and then eat it, and especially um, because we didn't have artificial lighting, so things basically wound down, and we went to sleep when the sun went down. So there just weren't that many hours to have that much food in the day, and especially when you have to go and like catch it and prepare it and get it all ready, like that takes some time of its own, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, and what's interesting is that, after this scarcity, let's say, was kind of over in when we developed agriculture, most of the religions had a way to recreate this through fat practices like Ramadan, and in Judaism and Christianity, there's Lent, and there's just fasting is prevalent in all of the major religions, basically. So that's also quite interesting. It's sort of like the scarcity was no longer present in the environment. So ancient wisdom in the form of culture came to take its place and kind of recreated that thing that we sort of needed to continue with. So
yeah, that's another great point. So there's especially in the Eastern world, there's people who will fast a few days a month, or they'll fast like a couple of days a week, and then there's kind of like the once a year fasting, which could kind of mimic like the like feast and plenty kind of times that our ancestors went through. So there would be times where they had enough food that they could find and eat, and then there would be times when even after we invented agriculture, there would be times where like you would go through a famine sometimes, right? Like the stars would align against you, and you wouldn't get the rain or whatever, and people would be starving or at least food insecure for some time. So I think like there's different cycles of life, and at each level I think we need to have like that feast and famine kind of recreated, so kind of at a yearly level as well as at the daily level and or the monthly level.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing that I remembered was like most people have it kind of drilled into them that breakfast is the most important meal, right? And like And then there's this saying, right, that you should eat like a king in the morning and I don't know, like a queen for lunch and like a pauper for dinner, something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this other idea that it's healthy to eat, most of your food, in the morning. And so like, I mean, maybe that was true for our ancestors, but it was more of a brunch, right? It was more of like a maybe brunch or lunch than actually a breakfast. And do you know, like, was breakfast something that was kind of like invented by, like food cereal companies or something, right? Like at some point in industrialization, we kind
Mm-hmm.
of like invented the idea of breakfast, right? I think I've
Yeah.
read that somewhere.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, as a result of being able to store food, and then also with the Industrial Revolution, it was kind of a thing that you did before work, like you had breakfast. And yeah, cereal companies definitely marketed. Actually, one interesting thing that I was reading recently is about um, during the first wave of feminism movement, a lot of cereal and convenience foods companies would market their foods to women because it was kind of part of this feminist agenda of like free yourself of the domestic mundanity of cooking for your family, and like you shouldn't have to do that, and here is all this convenient food like cereal that you can just give to your kids without having to do this, and you can focus on your career and all of this. So yeah, that it's I think that yeah, there have been kind of marketing strategies that have just jumped on different trends, and I guess hijacked them in kind of insidious ways, because obviously malnourishing your family is not you know a good a good way to kind of talk about empowerment or like encourage empowerment of women. So
All right. Yeah, so I think people, I mean, there's a lot of other kind of like subtopics that can branch out from this, but I think people just need to be wary of food science in general, especially when it's paid for and promoted by a cereal company or some other company that
mhm.
wants to sell you food. So a lot of food science and the science of like when we should eat, how much we should eat, and what we should eat has been really infiltrated by giant corporations that make billions of dollars off of us eating.
Mhm.
So a lot of it you have to
Yeah,
take with a grain of salt.
but I wanted to add one more thing about the feast, if you just cycling back to that, because that is really interesting. I think there's a lot of people that say the feast period is just as important as the fast period in order to kind of turn up the volume on autophagy, because and this also ties into the seasonality aspect of it, but a lot of people practice this through doing ketosis for 2 weeks and then doing maybe a fast and then doing a feast after that, or they'll do 1 day a week of feast and 1 day fast. I mean, there's so many combinations that you can do, but it's this idea that when you fast, it kind of it just creates this like anabolic growth period driven by mTOR, I think. And then that also stimulates autophagy. So yeah, I think that, and it's interesting in the context of women. I was reading about during menstrual cycles, because people often crave carbs the few days before their period. It's really common, this thing of like people having chocolate binges or whatever it is. And this is actually a natural because insulin is needed in so many different hormonal processes. It's kind of like your body's way of saying like, I really need this hormone now. And then if you kind of eat the carbs during that period and then stop eating them afterwards and cycle back into like a fast or something low carb or keto, it can really help highlight the autophagy, but also just make the hormonal processes and everything that's happening just more efficient. So yeah, I found this interesting just because it's something that's sort of like inbuilt, and a lot of people actually try to repress. They're like, oh, my diet goes so well, and then just before my period I always fail. And it's sort of like, no, this is your body's way of saying it needs this process. Of course that there's a good ways of feasting. When I say feast, it's sort of like 100 to 200 grams of whole foods carbs. It's not sort of like Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's. But yeah, it's just eating more carbs than, let's say, you would ordinarily, and kind of listening to your body's wisdom on that rather than kind of denying it. So yeah, this is quite interesting, because I think that fasting, at least fasting, I think it's given kind of a bad name for specific people, like people with thyroid conditions, people who have hormonal imbalances, people with adrenal fatigue, right? People say, oh, fasting is not good for these people because fasting is essentially a stressor. And when you have hormone imbalance or adrenal fatigue, you don't want to stress your body even more. But I think that this feast and fast cycle can kind of be a way for those people to even gain the benefits of fasting without, just stressing their body for long periods of time. Like being in keto for a year or whatever, I don't think it really makes sense for those people.
Yeah. So some people may need to go through like it may be difficult to transition into this, like in the beginning, in the first like week or 2 or 3 weeks. There may be some struggle for your body to kind of like, switch, from eating all the time and grazing all the time, or even eating 3 meals a day, 3 square meals a day, to intermittent fasting. So I think, when people are trying something, they should give it like, maybe a week to 3 weeks to a month or something to see if their body can adapt. It may not work for everyone in every situation at all times. But the other thing that it kind of reminded me of was that the like when you first try it, like your body has got, like, especially if you eat at certain times every day, your whole body has gotten used to eating at those times, and like your stomach is on like a clock. It's like, this is the time that I usually have breakfast, and like it'll start creating a bunch of like enzymes to digest your food, and your mouth may start salivating, and you will feel really hungry right, often, if you eat every day at the same times. And so if you try to delete one of those times, like in the first few days at least, you're going to feel hungry, you're going to continue to feel hungry at that time. It's going to be a little bit difficult. You have to like tighten your belt, and that's one trick that actually works really well. I mean, it's like, we just say that word without really thinking about it, or that phrase, but it actually really like gets rid of hunger if you just like push in on your stomach from the outside. It like kind of like gets the signal that it's full. So that's one thing that helps you to get through those first few days, is literally to tighten your belt. But after the first few days, like you can like reset your body's expectations, and it will only like it's really not that hard to eat once a day, right? Like your body just won't be hungry the rest of the day, and then you'll get hungry at that one time of the day that you eat, and then you'll eat. And sometimes, like in the beginning, people will actually eat as almost as much or as much as they ate in 3 meals, but all in one
Mm-hmm.
meal. And the interesting thing, at least in mice, so Dave Sinclair, he's a longevity researcher. He's written a book, I think, called Longevity or something, which is great. But and he has a lot of great content on YouTube. But he compared mice eating like they had like a 1 hour window or something, like a very small window to eat, versus mice that could just eat all day. And the longevity difference, like the calorie difference was minuscule between them, right? Like the mice that ate once a day were basically able to eat almost as many calories as the ones who were eating all day long. And but their longevity and their health difference was tremendous. It was a huge difference in their health and longevity.
Mm-hmm.
I had something else that I wanted to say, but I forgot what it was. So, what did you want
What?
to say next, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wanted to also speak about, well, it's Dan Pompey. He's the researcher who I was speaking of, who talks about this feast thing. And I think what I find interesting about this feast and famine, or feast and fast, is it's interesting to see that it's really, well, in his theory, it's the variety that really helps the autophagy. And it's kind of keeping your body on its toes, right? You can do it at 1 day a week or 3 days a month, or you can do like a fast that's actually just keto, or a fast that's low calorie or low carb. And it's this idea that we don't just repeat, as you said, like eat breakfast, eat lunch, eat dinner, and then your body's kind of used to that and demands that, even though that's not what it needs. And it's interesting because this is really what's reflected in seasonal eating, and that's something that we hear a lot about, in terms of being healthy, like eating according to what the seasons are. And I think we were talking about this in regards to figs, and I was telling you how I had this fig obsession where I was eating like 30 figs a day because I'm in Greece and it's fig season, and the fig season's really short. So I was like, I need all the figs. And it's, interesting that they come about just before winter, right? It's this idea of kind of like fattening up for winter, and then they go away, and now there's no juicy fruits around, like there's just nothing. And then no one will eat figs again until that time next year. And the same with eggs. Like the chickens lay a lot more eggs in summer compared to winter, and we're not, I think actually, people in the health food sphere are kind of big culprits of this. It's sort of like they just eat avocados and eggs and bacon like all the time, and that can actually sometimes even trigger people to have intolerances to foods, because it's too much to do that. And our body really enjoys this kind of variety in types of foods, but also in terms of quantities. And we can kind of try to calibrate with the season of wherever we live and just kind of see what's in abundance there and go according to that. And I think, this is quite an interesting way to kind of tie it into ancestral wisdom also.
Yeah, I think that thing you mentioned was really interesting that I had never thought of either until I started talking to you, that like when you get overexposed to like one thing, you can develop like an allergy or intolerance to it. So when you're having the same thing day in, day out, then you can actually, your body can develop an intolerance just because it's been overexposed. And especially some things that like in the natural world, it would be difficult to get like a ton of, right?
Yeah.
like nowadays people eat a lot of like nut flours and stuff. I mean, it's not that easy to gather nuts and like make nut flour and have bread every day from nuts, right?
No.
If you're doing it yourself. So it's like there are some things that are like naturally like limited either in time or in space or just in location, right? Like it's hard to get a huge amount of some things, whereas nowadays like if you find a favorite food, you can get as much of it as you want, right? You can get bags and bags of almonds or whatever, pistachios or something, right? And they're shelled already oftentimes, and they're already like broken open and ready for you to eat. And I remember like in this, and like when I was growing up, like we visited Pakistan, and like they would bring out the nuts and they would all be in shells, and you'd have to have this equipment to like crack them open and then eat them. And it was like, it really slows you down. You really can't eat that many walnuts when they're in like a really hard shell, and you have to crack it open, and you have to pick out the pieces sometimes from the inedible shell. And you end up like just like self-limiting either like seasonally, right? Like when you're eating in sync with the seasons and in rhythm with the seasons and just eating what's coming. It's like a self-regulation mechanism, as well as like just getting the food out from its natural kind of like, exposure, kind of limits how much you can eat and how quickly you can eat. So, I mean, there's also kind of like a signal from your stomach to your brain that, hey, I'm done. Okay, stop sending food. And it's on a delay, right? And if you can like physically delay, somehow how long it takes you to, or how quickly you can inject food into your belly, you will feel full even without eating as much if you can just like eat slower.
And even seeing the shells, I find like whenever I eat peanuts, a bag of the peanuts, and then when you shell them, it's like nothing, but there's just so like a mountain of shells, and you're like, wow, I just ate a lot of nuts, because you see the amount of shells that there are, and it gives you that kind of signal. So it's definitely better to think. Although, I do think that well, this is like a note on just kind of a wellness journey, like in a more macro sense. I think I used like paleo desserts were kind of my segue into the paleo diet, because I was kind of like, I cannot go without desserts. How do I find a way to make them paleo? And then I was super into, using nut flours, making cakes and breads and whatever. And I don't do that anymore, but it was kind of the thing that got me out of just eating bread and out of eating cake and stuff every day. So I think that there is a place for that. If there's the journey is just long, and I think if you need to take that step, it's better than not doing anything. I think it's better than kind of fully restricting and then denying yourself and then just binging on loads of cake. It's better to kind of have a little piece of paleo brownie every day and then finally realize you don't need that. So
I kind of went through the same thing, and I noticed that like those things are a lot harder to get your hands on, and they're a lot more expensive, and they're harder to make.
Yeah.
And so like that itself acts as like the limiting factor that like, and you'll like, you'll go somewhere and people will be having dessert and you just won't have it because there's no option that you
Yeah.
are allowing yourself to eat. Or you'll go somewhere you'll be traveling and you'll go to a bakery and it's like they don't have anything paleo, they don't have
Yeah.
anything that you've allowed yourself to eat, but you know that like you don't feel as like restricted, or I'm not thinking of the word, but like you don't feel as limited, or like it's not as
Compromised.
hard on you,
Hmm.
like psychologically not as weighty on you, when you know that you can have like the thing that you want. It's just like you have to jump through some extra hoops to get it, or to make it, or to find it, or to
Hmm.
pay for it. So yeah, it is like I think people need to be like easy on themselves and diplomatic with themselves, right? So you have to have diplomacy with your own self, right? So you have to be kind to yourself and find a way to like achieve what you want, and kind of like guide yourself away from where you're at to the place that you want to be, without failing, right? Without making it so hard
Hmm.
that you end up failing. So that is really important. Make it sustainable, and then gradually over time, like you can move the goalposts and you can shift further and further away from where you used to be towards where you ideally want to be. And the goalposts will oftentimes naturally change on their own, right? Like you may think that this is where I want to get to, and once you get there, you'll be like, well, I want to keep moving, right? So like people,
Hmm.
in order for your life to be interesting, you have to be like moving forward in space, time, or like inside yourself. Even like there has to be a journey that's going on, and journey just means like some sort of change in a certain direction, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's important to keep your life interesting and to keep and stay engaged. um, so we should talk a little bit about like how autophagy happens, like what increases the amount of autophagy that's happening. So like the thing people have been talking the most about and interested the most about with long haul illness is like the intermittent fasting. So Tom Bunker has a autophagy inducing intermittent fasting protocol, and the people that have tracked their results, at least on his website, something like at least 80% of them, if not more, found their symptoms get at least 80% better just doing this one thing, which was, I think, eating on like, having like a fasting period every day of 16 hours, and then once or twice a week doing a 24 to 48-hour fast. So like if it was once a week, they would do a 24-hour fast. If it was, sometimes they would combine two 24-hour fasts together, and make it a 48-hour fast. So that's one way. So the intermittent fasting, and then the question is, how long does it take? Like, how long do I need to fast? And so there's not like a clear answer on this in the literature. I mean, people will say that it's got to be at least 18, 19 hours. Other people will say it has to be even more than 24 hours. So I think looking back at our ancestors, I would say for like a daily thing, if you can get down to once a day, then 19 hours is pretty easy. I mean, you can do like 23 hours even without a real problem. Like you can eat for like 2 or 3 hours if you want, right? And what I've experienced is if you do that, you'll have a meal, and then you might snack a little bit after. Like you'll have a meal and you feel full, and then you're like, well, I want some nuts and I want some dessert and stuff, something, right? And you'll have a few more snacks for the next few hours, just because you're like, I'm gonna be fasting for another day before I can eat again. And you'll be like, I want this and I want that and I just want to eat something. um, but oftentimes, especially if you can avoid sugar and really refined carbohydrates, but especially sugar, right? Like the super refined carbohydrates, which are like super sweet. If you can avoid those for at least a week or two, usually you won't be like super binge eating, right? Like your appetite just kind of normalizes. I mean, this is what I experience when I eat sugar and other highly refined carbs that are very sweet. It just like my appetite just goes way up. It like 10x's, like I can eat way
Hmm.
more food of all kinds, right? Which is why sugar is now added to like foods that aren't even sweet, because it just makes it more palatable and makes you want to eat more of anything. But even when it's not in the food, I find that like if you're eating sugar, you tend to eat more of like other like carbs that aren't necessarily super sweet, but they, they're probably refined. So it just increases your appetite overall throughout the day. So if you're trying to heal from chronic disease, I think, personally speaking, you really got to limit or remove. And it depends on you, right? Like, are you somebody who can limit sugar to like very small quantities and just like enjoy like a tiny amount, as like a small dessert, a portion? Or like, are you somebody psychologically, yourself that like, if you eat sugar, you're going to eat a lot of it? And I mean, that's me. I know myself. And so like, I have to, I mean, I can have like one super sweet date maybe, and then stop. But if it's like sugar and like the stuff that's made out of sugar, over the course, like if I go from zero sugar to like start eating sugar, my appetite for it will, over the course of like 2 or 3 weeks, increase to the point where I can literally eat like 6 cupcakes in a sitting, right? Or if not more, like a pint of ice cream or something, and you're not satisfied, and then like 3 hours later you want more cupcakes. So anyway, I'm getting off topic here, but so autophagy, one way to trigger it is the fasting. Humbucker's protocol is kind of like proven for long COVID. So I think that's a great place to start. And then other things like, Michelle, like you mentioned earlier, were like exercise, keto. Keto might be one way for some people to do it if you can't really put up with the fasting, or you can't, psychologically get yourself to that point. Keto might be an easier way for you to trigger autophagy, because at least you can eat food. It's just not all the food that you want. You got to limit the carbs. And if you're really aiming for keto to get into autophagy, then I would probably get the urine strips to test to see if you're making ketones. If you're peeing out ketones in your urine, like, are you actually in ketosis? Because it's a little bit tricky sometimes to get into it. And I mean, what's the point of like suffering, if you're not actually achieving what you want, if achieving the aim. And then there are a lot of supplements and vitamins and herbs and even medications that can trigger autophagy, and other ones that suppress it. So hydroxychloroquine actually suppresses autophagy, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, and may even be beneficial for some like cancer treatments. So this is another kind of little angle that I wanted to touch on, that somebody in the group had mentioned, that in some studies, autophagy helps you prevent cancer, right? Like, it helps to get rid of cancer cells. But once you have an established cancer, sometimes autophagy may not be beneficial, and you may want to actually suppress it in certain circumstances in order to help get rid of the cancer cells. So autophagy can happen. There's a stressor on your body, you trigger autophagy, and it kind of strengthens the cell, right? So at the same time, you can strengthen cancer cells, apparently. So people who actually have cancer, they may need to be a little bit more careful. And I don't know enough about this topic to be able to tell you, like, okay, if you have cancer, you shouldn't like fast. I don't think that's the case, but you just may need to be more careful about it, and do a little bit more research on it, about how to do it and when to do it in the setting of a cancer treatment protocol. So that's one kind of like edge case that I don't know enough about. But things like, curcumin or turmeric, and, even like ivermectin triggers autophagy. A lot of different herbs help to trigger autophagy. We're just talking about like, how much is it? Resveratrol has, made a splash with the FLCCC. Dr. Mubin Syed and Dr. Paul Merrick have been talking about it. Spermidine, they've also mentioned. So resveratrol and spermidine for triggering autophagy. And but like a lot of substances, and then exercise, will help you trigger it. Especially, I think, in a fasted state would probably be the best way to do it. So Michelle, tell us also, like, anything else that I'm missing here, or other things you want to say about those?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also interesting to do those in combination. So if you're in ketosis, it's going to be easier to fast. So you could do keto and then do a fast, and then kind of cycle back into a normal whole food paleo diet. And then in a week or two, kind of do something of that variation. And then again, as you said, doing fasted exercise. I think the polyphenols in tea and coffee actually help to trigger autophagy. And that's kind of why a lot of people in the sphere drink coffee and tea, even though this is controversial, because some people say it breaks the fast and others don't. But some people say that drinking, just a black coffee or tea, green tea, helps you to trigger autophagy because of the resveratrol and the polyphenols. So that is one interesting thing. Although I think drinking black coffee on an empty stomach is probably not the best, but maybe something like green tea or like any kind of herbal tea that still has those, because it's not the caffeine, it's the polyphenols that kind of trigger the autophagy. Right. So yeah, all of those things I think in combination can be used, and you can sort of figure out what's best for you. Like, is it harder to do the fast if you're not in ketosis? Can some of those take the place of, as you said, maybe fasting is impossible, but you try to do keto. I think there's something like 50 different types of fasting, like ways in which you can fast. And there are just so many theories about the order in which and the time windows, and then, how you should break the fast and what is considered a fast. And, and of course, it's always bio-individual, as we always say. So someone with kind of adrenal fatigue, you might want to try a different type of fasting to someone who is an athlete, for example, because you want to kind of mitigate the stress on your body. So maybe something like a keto is better than doing like a 2-day fast if you have adrenal fatigue. And having, like coffee on an empty stomach wouldn't be great for someone who has adrenal fatigue either. So it's kind of being aware of the combinations that are available, and then what kind of suits your body or your context or phase that you're in.
Yeah, I mean, I've even heard like experts on fasting being asked like what breaks the fast, and sometimes it's just like, well, just like anything that has a lot of calories, right? Like I mean, like, yeah, so like green tea might have like a microcalorie in it, right? But it's not, right? I mean, you're swallowing little bits of your, like, the lining of your mouth every minute, right? Like a few cells, right? So it's not about like that. So tea, I would say, is certainly like without sugar, right?
Yeah.
Or creamer or whatever, right? Like it's just plain tea with nothing else in it. That's not something that I would consider breaking the fast. But the other thing I wanted to mention was that deep sleep also is really important, especially for neural autophagy. So with your brain getting rid of junk proteins, you really need like deep sleep, and melatonin is part of the things that triggers it, the autophagy to happen in your brain. And so that may also be beneficial as a supplement for people who aren't able to get deep sleep because of COVID, or long haul. And also, like, a lot of people with long haul just can't tolerate exercise, and so that is not going to be really beneficial for some people, at least in the beginning, until they've gotten better enough that they can tolerate it and not feel worse with it. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that about breaking the fast, that a lot of people have, I mean, so like, and then if you're taking like some supplements or something, does that break the fast? I mean, if you're having like 3 or 4 calories, right, like that's not gonna break like a fasted state. So I personally think that like if you're taking a supplement or something, that shouldn't break your fast. Neither does tea or anything. So unless you're, I mean, eating, like actually eating, right, or taking in like significant calories, that you can assume that it's not breaking the fast or interfering with it.
Yeah, and it doesn't even go to zero anyway. Say if you had coffee with some MCT oil and, I don't know, raw cream or something, it wouldn't be like, oh, everything's gone to waste, now I'm at zero. It's still gonna have benefits.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
probably even like as much as like a teaspoon of honey or something. I mean, it's pretty minimal, right? Like it's a tiny amount, and it's not going to really affect your body significantly. So I mean, just to kind of like psychologically stay in that state, I would try to avoid anything that has like, a significant amount of calories or significant caloric density, personally, and have those things like at the time that I'm eating. But things that, we normally think of as being basically 0 calorie, like, unsweetened tea and like supplements, and other things like that, I wouldn't, worry about at all.
Yeah, especially if they help to facilitate autophagy, things
Right.
like tea, polyphenols and tea. So
Yeah. Was there anything else that we wanted to cover today?
I think I have said, I'm just having a look at my notes. I think um yeah, I think this is it. That I made a note about apoptosis, the autophagy kind of helps. It's a mechanism. It's not the same as apoptosis, which is the cell death, but it kind of is a mechanism that helps to facilitate that. And that's kind of, I mean, we spoke about this before, but it, often autophagy is kind of talked about in the context of neurodegenerative disease and Alzheimer's and dementia and these kind of things. And I think it makes sense considering those diseases are usually, different buildups in your brain that basically are not being cleared over time. And, there's different theories about why that happens, like lack of sleep is one of them. Like your body's just kind of accumulating toxins over years and years, and autophagy is kind of a way to help people with those kind of conditions. I don't think, yeah, we didn't speak about that specifically, but that's really the only other note that I had.
So I just opened up like the Q&A, and there are a bunch of Q&As. I just came across a couple that I think we should touch on. So the first one was like about sugar alternatives. What sugar alternatives do you recommend that are healthy and won't break my fast? I use monk fruit, is stevia or Splenda good for you? And I know that I've seen like, some research that, and I think we've talked about it before, Michelle, you might know more about this, that like just like sweetness itself does something in your body, right? Like it doesn't matter if it has no calories.
Yeah.
And so like the quote unquote 0-calorie sweeteners still like impact your physiology in a very similar way to like a sweetener that has calories, right? So can you tell me a little bit more about that? We had talked about it before, right?
Yeah, because there's kind of a dysregulated pattern between our perceived sweetness levels and the caloric satiation factor that's kind of associated with that. So your body kind of has this feeling like, oh, something sweet is coming, but then whatever the caloric expectation of that sweetness is just doesn't happen. And then that disconnect can actually dysregulate your appetite later on in the day. And so there is that, but I think, definitely in terms of the splendor, I think you said like that there's a huge difference between like monk fruit, which is just an kind of a natural low glycemic fruit sweetener, and something like Splenda, which I think is just completely, I don't think it's aspartame based, but I think it's completely synthetic. And the sugar alcohols and the synthetic sweeteners are definitely not good for our gut health. And they have a bunch of other negative effects on bloating and gas and those kind of things. But so I think, I mean, maybe the stevia leaf, and the monk fruit could be the best of those options. But yeah, there's still the issue that we said about this dysregulating
And so
factor.
basically what it means is that like people who sweeten things, like they sweeten like a dessert with a 0-calorie sweetener instead of sweetening it with sugar, may find that they actually eat more than they would have otherwise eaten.
Yeah.
So you end up like shooting yourself in the foot where you're thinking that you're getting rid of the calories, but your body actually makes up for it by eating more food throughout the day. It might not even be like in that sitting, but it might be later that you just have more of an appetite because your body's like, there were supposed to be calories here with that sweetness, which is the reason that we've like evolved to like seek out sweetness, because it's a signal to your brain that this thing has a lot of calories in it. Like in the natural world, when something is sweet, it's like rich in calories, and it's like fast acting calories. It's like the calories that'll like give you some energy right away. And so like we want to find that thing in the world, in nature in the wild. And so our bodies can't make sense of 0-calorie sweeteners, right? It doesn't compute, right? It does not make sense. And your body's like, where were the calories with that? And then it goes and finds them. It pushes you to get the calories, right? And so like I was on this same bandwagon, right? Like trying to find the perfect sweetener, and there are sweeteners, right? Like that have no calories and basically taste the same as sugar, right? Like erythritol, and there's even newer ones,
Allulose.
right? Allulose and stuff. But
Yeah.
like if you take a step back and think about it, right? It's kind of like, how could these possibly be healthy? Because like in nature, they're found in minute quantities. Okay, it
Mm.
takes a tremendous amount of processing to extract minute tiny quantities of those sweeteners from the fruits or whatever that they're found in, and then like you concentrate them into like a bag of sugar, or monk fruit sweetener or whatever. It's just like just like looking at it from a higher level, it's just like, how could this be good for us? Right, like,
Mm-hmm.
it just takes so much effort and such an industrialized process and so many chemicals oftentimes to get those things out, right? You
Yeah.
gotta
And
so
that's why they
so I,
cause other negative side effects, so maybe, and this is the thing, it's like the isolated thinking. It's like, okay, great, this is low glycemic, it doesn't spike my blood sugar, but then if it causes bloating and indigestion and makes your gut health poor, then that's going to cause other negative effects later on down the line that you'll then have to deal with. So there's no point in kind of seeing it in this very isolated way, like, great, it did that, the job is done. It has to
yeah,
make sense in a broader context.
and I think like you can oftentimes get the answer from like generalizing something or like putting the thing into context, but and it'll often like point you to the answer, like it's like, well, this can't be good for me, right, because of the way it's made, and just like it doesn't make sense that like something that's found in nature in minuscule quantities, like you literally can't eat that much of it. It's impossible without having industry, like without
Mm.
having like all of this like technology to extract it. It would have been impossible for our ancestors to eat that much monk fruit extract or that much allulose. Like it would have
Mm.
been literally impossible. They could have roamed the entire earth and not been able to get that much of it out, or like they would have had to eat like a ton of pears or something to get that much allulose, or whatever it is, whichever fruit allulose comes from. So like it just would have been impossible. And so like just looking at it from that point of view, that like our bodies have not evolved to handle this thing. So like what is it doing on its way out of our bodies, right? Like, is it good for your kidneys or your gut to be exposed to like such high quantities of something that like are just not present in nature? Like, we don't know. And so like the science is always going to lag behind like just like common sense, right? Like your common sense may tell you, if you think about it, that this can't be right, that like it's probably going to harm me, because our bodies have not evolved to deal with it. And then like 10, 15, 20 years down the line, like finally somebody will get to the point of running, doing the study, or the science will develop to the point where you're like, oh yeah, this is destroying our kidneys and it's causing kidney disease, as it's going through, as you're peeing it out, without absorbing the calories, or whatever. So the science is not always there, and then the science comes, and then like we move on to the next one, right? So like we've gotten to the point where we know that some things aren't good for us, like Splenda, and now we think that, well, okay, Splenda wasn't good for whatever reason, but now let's try this other thing, which should be good, right? So, but
Mm.
still, even all that being said, if you need that as a transition, I
Yeah.
understand. you know, um, I would just say that maybe just use some, like for me, what I thought was a good transition was like I didn't really think these things were natural, and I thought that they probably aren't healthy for me because of how highly processed they are. So I was just like, okay, I'm just going to use honey and maple syrup and just use those and like figure out how to bake with those, and just take the caloric hit instead of like messing up my brain and getting confused and trying to eat more calories later. Just
Mm.
have your sweets and eat them too,
Yeah.
just eat the sweets, and take the calories, and try to like change like the flavor of it. So like if you go from eating nothing but like sugar sweetened stuff, like sucrose sweetened stuff, to eating like honey sweetened stuff, it's going to taste a little bit weird because honey has its own flavor, and you're going to eat less of it just naturally, because you're just like, it doesn't taste as good to you, right? It doesn't taste the way the sugar stuff does, right? It has its own flavor added on top.
Mm.
Yeah, so and try to eat things that are really sweet, but that they're like fruits. Like the other thing that I used to do, I would create desserts out of like dates, right? So I took
Mm.
like whole like medjool dates, which are just like you don't need to really process them because they just they're so squishy and like full of sugar. but still there's a lot of fiber mixed in, and so it kind of delays, and it's I think it's definitely better for you than like sucrose, that and so as a sweetener, it's really easy to use. You can like mash it up and you can blend it or something, and you can add it to other things, and you can add it to like like chocolate that has no sugar in it and create like a bar that's like very
Yeah.
sweet. Like you
Yeah.
can basically recreate the sensation of a brownie with like a medjool date and like a chunk of chocolate, like 100% chocolate with no sugar in it. You mix them together and like add some nuts and stuff, and it like tastes like a brownie, right?
Yeah.
Without
That's
having
one of my favorite snacks. That's like my go-to snack. It's like a
yeah.
date with a square of 99% and a scoop of almond butter. And then those things together, it just is really good. And yeah, dates have the fiber to kind of slow the release of sugar into your
Yeah.
bloodstream. So, and even things like beetroot, like beetroot and sweet potato, they make amazing brownies if you mix them with dates or a bit of honey.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what I found is that like they don't have the same addictive quality, right? Like they oftentimes taste just as good. Like the taste, the
mhm,
flavor, everything is oftentimes spot on, but you just don't feel like eating a ton of them. And I think it's because there's the fiber there, and it's just like, I don't know. I think sucrose itself is addictive, right? I think we do have science on
mhm,
that it is as addictive or more addictive than cocaine. Whereas some of the other natural sweeteners don't have that same addictive nature to them, right? It
mhm,
doesn't like you don't feel that pull that I gotta eat more and more and more and more and eat it all day long, right? That doesn't happen when you sweeten something with dates.
yeah.
Even though like literally it can taste as good, and
Mhm,
as the sugar. Actually, after a while, if you try to eat the sugar stuff, it tastes kind of empty. It doesn't like it because
yeah.
it doesn't have that extra flavor to it from the date or the honey or the whatever else that you've been using. The sugar sweetened stuff actually starts to taste a little bizarre when you go back to trying it,
Mhm.
and not as fulfilling, but it's still addictive. And if you keep eating it, at least me, I will get addicted to it again. We've taken like 10 minutes on one question. um, but I think it's an important one, right? Like I think it's a really
Mm,
important question actually, because a lot of people, and it took me a long time, it literally took me years to get to the point where like stop chasing like the elusive perfect 0-calorie sweetener. It's just it it doesn't exist, right? Like you can't fool your brain and your body by going 0-calorie. It's just not going to work. um
mhm.
I mean, the other point is like, sure, maybe the sweetener is 0-calorie, but you have to like add it to something that has calories, right? Like
Yeah.
the dessert's not going to be 0-calorie. It's going to have calories from like, the flour or whatever, else that you're adding to it. And I think that, like we said earlier, you're probably going to end up eating as many calories. And so why not just like enjoy the thing without like the weird kind of flavor from the monk
Mm,
fruit or the stevia or whatever that's kind of off-putting, not quite
mm.
natural and not quite as satisfying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that people often say, I hear, critics of dates and these kind of things just say like, oh, the type of sugar is the same as fructose or the same, it's molecularly the same. But the difference is that dates have so many other nutrients and minerals,
Mhm.
and, you're not just having sugar, you're having something that has other qualities to it, fiber. Um, so there is a big difference. You're still getting something nutrient dense as opposed to just overly focusing on like, okay, how is my insulin going to respond to this? It's like, okay, well, date a sweet potato cacao brownie, that could be super nutritious, like if you get raw cacao that still has like a lot of magnesium, if you're using a sweet potato, it could actually be part of like a nutrient dense diet. It's not to view it as this thing where it's like, this is something bad, but how do I make it the least bad possible? Like, I don't think that attitude is like a very good way of thinking about eating, or at least a sustainable way.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a good point that like part of the reason that we're overeating is that our bodies are like, thinking that usually like this thing that tastes sweet comes along with a lot of other nutrients, micronutrients, and those micronutrients are part of the nutrition and your body needs them and it craves them, right? And so like one of the reasons that you're you like crave, eating, like you want to eat more and more, and you have these cravings, is because your body's actually looking for the micronutrients that are usually found along with the sweet fruit, like they might even be found in sugarcane, right, for example, or in a date, and you're not getting that because like the micronutrients have been subtracted from the equation, and all you have is the sweet flavor and the calories that go along with the sweet, with no micronutrients at all. And then you add that to something else. So that's, one good rule of thumb is just avoid like added sweeteners. And so if you take a date, it's not an added sweetener because you're eating the whole date, right? You're not extracting the sweetness from the date and putting it into something else. You're actually putting the whole date into a food and making it like it's a whole food, right? It's the entire food. And you're just combining it with another whole food, right? Combining it with chocolate and some nuts and, a little bit of salt, I would say. And if you tolerate, dairy, some cream, is really good also. A dollop of cream. All right, so I think we could just keep talking about this one topic forever. But I did want to mention, I think we're basically out of time. I mean, I don't like to just like be a slave of the clock, so I'm not just gonna like stop talking in the next 5 seconds. But I did want to mention that we have, supplements at my go-to stack that we have formulated specifically for long haulers. And so there is a resveratrol supplement that's there. And there are a number of other ones that are specifically formulated for long haulers. And let's see if we can just do like one other of the questions that we got. I've been only eating one meal a day, along with a balance of nature fruits and vegetables, power, and supplements. I've lost 25 pounds, and my long COVID is getting better. This reminds me of a question that was somebody else had asked, like, I can't exercise, so like, how do I lose weight? And so this kind of answers the question that like one of the ways to lose weight is just to do intermittent fasting, right? That itself will help you lose weight. Oftentimes, even if you're eating a similar amount, but usually you just can't eat as much in 1 hour as you can in 24 hours. And the other way I would say to lose weight is kind of also an offshoot of this discussion we were just having on sugar, is to like stop eating sugar, stop eating the things that like make you want to eat a lot more than you would eat like normally, and then just like eat whole foods, right? Like, what is a whole food? I think that's a good question. It's like basically minimally processed food that like looks like what it did in nature, right? Like you get a tomato, that's a whole food. It's a whole tomato. Whereas like tomato puree is, a processed version of the tomato. And so like salads were just like you chop up, even chopping is a form of processing. So like minimally processed, so like chopping them up, maybe dicing them, foods, and so minimally processed whole foods. And then intermittent fasting is one of the best ways to lose weight and avoid added sweeteners. So like taking sugar and adding it to a recipe, avoid doing that.
And also walking. I mean, I know that's exercise, but it's a very gentle exercise. And I think people underestimate how much weight you can lose walking. For me, it's like always the most weight that I lose is when I'm walking a lot. When I live in a city that's really walkable and I'm walking every day, it's quite much more noticeable than if I'm like doing a CrossFit class or something. So
the other thing is, a lot of people, and I think it's both men and women probably, but like, yeah, I think a lot of people have a lot of weight from stress. So like, I've seen, people have super stressful jobs, and then they move to like a job that they love, and it's got like a nice environment and everyone's happy and friendly, and they just start losing weight, right? Or they're in a really stressful relationship or something, right? And sometimes it's like your partner that you've been living with for years, and they just like give you tremendous amounts of stress, and you're just like, why can't I lose weight? And that's the reason. So stress creates cortisol, and cortisol is basically a form of prednisone. So like when you give somebody these are steroids. When you give somebody prednisone or other corticosteroids, they gain weight. That's one of the side effects of cortisol and steroids and cortisone, right? It's weight gain. So you can create your own cortisone and your own steroids, your own corticosteroids in your body, which will make you fat, right? Unless you like relax, unless you get and so some people are in stressful situations that you can't extract yourself from them. You got to do like relaxation exercises. And the other thing is that some people don't realize they're in stressful situations, right? But they are. So like they're under chronic stress, but it doesn't like translate into their brain as like I'm stressed out, but it's still stress in your body. Your body takes it as stress, and it creates the corticosteroids and makes you fat. So I would just assume that like everyone is stressed out. And if you're overweight, you're probably, that itself is a stressor, which is like creating a vicious cycle of making it difficult to lose the weight because the weight itself is stressing you, which is raising your corticosteroid levels, which is making you gain more weight. So like it becomes like the snowball effect. Like the more weight you gain, it's like the more weight you gain, right? So like the bigger you get, the easier it is to get even bigger and to keep getting bigger. So you got to break this cycle, right? And so like deep breathing exercises, you just got to do them like 4 or 5 times a day. So like the 6, 7, 8 breathing is really great one for like calming down. Just do it like 4 breaths, breathe in 6 seconds, just count in through your nose. So 6 seconds, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, like that. Hold your breath for a count of 7, 1,000s, and then breathe out through pursed lips for 8 seconds or count of 8 inside your head. Just 4 breaths, 4 times a day will do it. But there's other deep breathing exercises that are also really beneficial. And sometimes you kind of have to try a few different ones to find the one that really works well for you. And, they don't all work great for me. Like I've tried some and it's just like I feel more stressed out now. Like you gotta try out some different ones, and then try mindfulness meditations also are really easy to do. What else, Michelle?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's interesting
Walking in
theories.
nature.
Yeah, walking in nature. I mean, well, there's two things. Like, I think some breathwork techniques make people more stressed because they recreate hyperventilating, which is what you do when you are stressed out. So there's this contraindication. But yeah, I think removing stressors in general, and people, it's kind of like identifying stressors. So, toxins in skincare, toxins in environment, like using having the Wi-Fi on when you're asleep, like blue light at night. There's so many kind of stress, having structural misalignments, like these kind of things that are just stressing your body all the time. Just removing those and identifying first and then removing those, as well as kind of the emotional stress aspect, which is really big.
Cool. Marilza says, does intermittent fasting work as well as fasting for autophagy? And she notes that I'm getting ready for Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in Judaism, and occurs annually on the 7th month of the Hebrew calendar, primarily centered on atonement and repentance. The day's observances consist of full fasting and ascetic behavior accompanied by intensive prayer as well as sin confessions. And just before we kind of answer the question, I do want to mention that a lot of the fasting research has been done on full fasting, not like because there's a lot of people who do that, right? So, Jews and Muslims and Christians, right? Like they fast from food and water, right? Oftentimes. And so since there's like these groups of people who are doing this, studies have been done on them because they're already doing it. And so there's this question in my mind that like, if a lot of the research on the benefits of fasting has been on dry fasting, right? Like no food, no water, is the no water part of it really important to have? Or is it just the no calories? So that gets back into like what breaks the fast. And my sense would be that there's probably something that the water is also doing for us. Like avoiding the water is also probably beneficial, as just because it's also an added stressor, right? That would be one level of it, that like, being thirsty is kind of hard. But recently I met someone here in Puerto Rico who mentioned that there's a lot of research in Russia, in the Russian literature and in Russian, and it's hard to like access, but they've done a lot of research on, dry fasting. And their theory is like one of the ways that it helps you lose weight, for example, is that your body has to create water itself to like hydrate you. So while you're breaking things down, you're actually liberating water inside your body in order to sustain yourself during that dry fast. And the other thought that I've had is that, drying yourself out a little bit, like slightly, may shift the balance of microbes in your gut significantly. So as your gut kind of gets a little bit drier, and it might just be like a slight amount, right? Things will change in your gut for sure, just because like the environment has a tremendous effect on the gut microbiome, and especially things like yeast, fungus, and stuff like that. So people, who used to dry fast, religiously, once a year or, monthly or whatever, weekly or whenever, they may have been holding those microorganisms in check. And that would have been, one of the kind of like detox mechanisms of thinning the herd of bad things. There are things that can tend to overgrow when you're eating certain foods. And so I think this is also another really important topic to talk about, like how much hydration is really healthy. And I know that the hydration studies were done in people who were sick. And when you're sick, you need a lot more water than when you're well, right? Like your body is using up micronutrients and water and everything, right, at a higher rate because you're under stress and you're trying to get better and you're just cycling through more stuff. Which is one of the reasons, like you run out of micronutrients, you run out of like zinc. When you've gone through COVID, your whole body zinc stores will plummet, and sometimes it might take like a year to recover them completely. And the same with other, micronutrients. And so that's one reason that we do test micronutrients in long haulers and people who've had vaccine injuries. But the question, around water, it's like very like specific to the person, like how much water do you need? And so some people, you'll chronically drink less water for whatever reason, like an abnormally smaller amount of water, and you'll get used to it, right? Like you won't be thirsty anymore. But then when you like increase your water intake, you'll find that you feel better. So I think people have to oftentimes experiment with themselves. So I just spoke with a long hauler, I think it was yesterday. And the only thing he changed to make himself like 90% better was drinking more water. I mean, like his symptoms weren't gone, but he felt way, way better just by increasing his fluid intake. And the sign that, was there was that he was developing kidney stones. And finally, like his urologist, it wasn't me, told him that, like, if you want to avoid kidney stones, you need to drink more water. That's one of the, lifestyle choices that you can make that will diminish your likelihood of. So his body was already telling him, like, that was one of the signs that was there, that like, hey, you're not getting enough water and you're not urinating enough because you're not getting enough water. And so sometimes there will be signs that you're, kind of dried out. Maybe your skin is a little bit dry. But you don't always feel thirsty. Like there's not always thirst. Sometimes your body loses its, but then when you start drinking more water, your thirst level will change. And so then you'll kind of like, your body will readjust to the higher amount of water intake, and you will be thirsty unless you drink that much. So that's kind of a little bit about water. But to get back to the question, does intermittent fasting work as well as fasting for autophagy? So we kind of answered it in the beginning, that like there's like uncertainty in the literature, how long you have to fast in order to get into like autophagy, or to like really get a strong boost to your autophagy. Some people say 19 hours, some people say 24 plus, some people say like 28, some people think that it's longer. And the answer is we really don't know. But I think looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, I think that intermittent fasting definitely is beneficial. And then full fasting, like I was saying, it may have its own benefits, and it may be even stronger. And fasting for longer periods, especially once in a while, I think is a great practice, right? Like once a year, doing a full fast, like for 24 hours, even from water, is great. And people can go, for oftentimes months without food, but just days without water. So with that, you would want to have some water probably, after 24 hours. You wouldn't want to go, although people can probably go longer, probably up to a few days without water before you keel over, because your body does kind of like start metabolizing things and creating its own intracellular water, and intracellular and intercellular water. But we're not really sure how long people can go without water, but 24 hours would not be too long. What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, I think I've also read what you said. Our body kind of uses the fat to unlock water. And then because of that, we actually lose more fat through a dry fast than we do through just a water fast. But yeah, I like the story that you told about the water, because I think it speaks to this bio-individual aspect of healing that we always talk about. And I think, our body gives us different signals that something is wrong. And so, just listening to that is really the most important thing. So if this person had kidney stones, it could be a signal that he needs more water. And then whatever water is used for so many different functions, like lubricating joints, like move it, like the viscosity of your blood. There's just so much that water is used for. So it would have helped the kidney stones, but probably many other processes were just kind of kickstarted, which then kickstarts healing because that was something that was missing. Whereas for someone else, it just wouldn't have the same effect if that's not what was going on in your body. And that's why it's really important to kind of think that there's no one size fits all for everyone, and usually the answer is just what's happening with your body, and then just finding something that will tailor specifically to that.
Yeah.
And that way it's actually more simple. Like as you said, this person just drank more water, you know, rather than maybe you can read online about all of these different things that people have used to help long COVID, but in the end it was just drinking more water that really helped him. So
So somebody was asking if low-dose naltrexone induces autophagy, and so I didn't know the answer. I mean, I just looked it up. So it, you know, it may increase like endorphin levels, which induce autophagy. But yeah, so I don't really know that anyone knows the answer. There may have been research on this particular question. A lot of things help to induce autophagy. So it is like a microdose of naltrexone, but it does appear that it is one of its effects is inducing autophagy. A lot of the things that are helping probably are helping in one way by inducing autophagy. Like I said, the ivermectin and turmeric and Nigella sativa and dandelion, and like most of these herbs that are recommended, and polyphenols, you know, from like resveratrol as a polyphenol, these are all autophagy inducers. And so the ones that the FLCCC most focuses on are resveratrol and spermidine. But there are a lot that are already in the protocol before we were really even focusing on them that do induce autophagy. So I know there's a lot of other questions, and yeah, I think I'd like to like keep going a little bit just because I'm not exhausted yet, even if everyone else is. You can come back and watch later. Michelle, do you want to keep going
yeah,
a little bit longer?
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we can keep going.
All I know is I need to eat in capital letters, EAT capitals. I'm 4'11", January I was 165, now 109 because I stopped eating junk, but haven't added enough foods to keep my weight on. This burning is awful. It attacks my nervous system and my chest and sinuses. I don't have energy to stand and prepare foods or stand because of physical back pain. So I do come across some long haulers, a significant, you know, percentage, not most of them, but a significant small percentage who have lost weight and find trouble like keeping the weight on with long haul COVID. And so like long COVID is and vaccine injuries, a significant part of it is like this sympathetic overload and this kind of like I'm not sure where your burning is, oh, in your like chest and your sinuses. So there is a lot of sympathetic overload involved that can explain some of the symptoms that you're having. And the weight loss, I'm not really 100% sure why some people have trouble keeping the weight on, but I have heard that. The other thing, let's see, with 411 and 109, like what's the BMI? Because some people get really worried. I mean, it does sound like you've lost a lot of weight, but some people get really worried and they don't necessarily need to be. And one of the things that I've found is that, you know, yeah, so the BMI is 22. That's not like that's like firmly in the normal weight category. So most people who've lost a lot of weight, they get really worried because they're like, this is not normal, right? Like this is something you expect to see in a cancer patient. But I think it's part of your body, like it's part of like a normal body response to severe illness sometimes, and severe chronic illness especially, is to like conserve the resources and apply them where they need to be used, and also to get you down to like a healthy weight. So you may actually not even yet be at a healthy weight for you, right? So you may actually need to lose more weight still before you get to healthy, or like your healthiest weight. And I think the other thing people worry about is like, if this continues at this rate, I'm going to go to zero, right? Like, where's this going to stop? It will stop, right? When your body is like, okay, this is the weight that I need to be at. So your body is like aiming for something that it needs to get to. It's like telling you, I want to go to this place. And once it gets to the set point that it's decided on, it's kind of like a temperature set point. It's like your body is aiming for a certain temperature, and it's for your own good, right? So like fevers will help you get rid of infections. It'll help make the body's environment inhospitable to viruses and microbes, until they're gone, until they burnt out. So the body is usually trying to do something in its wisdom, like trying to get to a spot that it feels like, this is where I need to be for right now, and I need to be there. And like, sometimes it's such a strong response that it's hard to overcome, and this is the case. So I tend to like want to tell people that, like, let your body do what it's trying to do, and don't worry that it's going to like overshoot. Well, like, once it gets to the weight that it feels it needs to be at in order to help you get better, it will stop. You're not going to keep losing weight, right? That doesn't happen. Aside from people who have cancer that's eating them up. So I would go and make sure that you don't have anything else other than long COVID. Go and talk to your doctor. But this idea that everyone needs to be fattened up, and they need to like push the calories when they're sick, I think may not always be the most helpful approach. Sometimes it's necessary to have like enough protein and stuff, and enough calories, and so sometimes people are not eating enough, but your body is trying to lower your weight. And again, at 4'11", 109, that's not overweight. And so you were probably significantly overweight, unless it's all muscle, I don't know. But most people who are 4'11", 169 are probably obese and very unhealthy. And at 109, you may be in the quote unquote normal range, but it may not be what you need. And so everyone so far who's come to me worried about their weight has not been even technically underweight. Like, even like technically underweight would be a BMI less than 18.5. I have so far not seen any long haulers get below that. And so I wouldn't worry. What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, I was going to say I actually had a similar story when I had COVID. I've had COVID 3 times now, which is quite inconvenient. But the middle time, I lost quite a lot of weight, because the middle time was when I felt the most sick, and I just couldn't eat for a few days because I was feeling sick. And then usually what happens to me then is my stomach shrinks and I can't eat as much like after that. And then it's kind of the similar thing as fasting. You like, I would eat a really small portion and would not be able to eat anymore. And then for me, the signal where it was too much was that I skipped a period after that. So then I realized that my body had lost too much weight. And this is the thing that's amazing as a woman. We have these cycles and we can learn so much information from that. So if you skip a menstrual cycle because you're underweight, then that's a sign you're underweight. But if you don't, and you're just kind of continuing as normal, I mean, this is one barometer. Obviously there are other things, but if this is one, because this one is so sensitive to weight loss, if you're kind of continuing to get your cycle as normal and that there's no changes, then that's also a good sign that maybe you're not too much underweight. And I think for me, I think my BMI is like 17, so I don't have so much, I'm not working with so much extra weight to lose and then be able to be okay. And that was actually a good, interesting lesson over that time. I was like, wow, I'm like very much on the edge, where if I lose weight, then I'm a non-functional essentially, like after that. So it was kind of a good barometer for that. And yeah, this is, I mean, I don't know how, if you're a man, how you would really gauge that, but it's kind of useful. And this person's a woman, right, asking the question. So I think paying attention to the cycle is a good way to kind of also know your weight range, like if you're in healthy range or not.
Yeah, she did mention energy. She says she doesn't have energy to stand. So energy would be another sign that you don't have enough energy, but it may also be long COVID itself and not calories that you're missing. Like, it might not be, the energy may not be a calorie deficit problem, right? It may be a mitochondrial dysfunction problem, which is usually what it is for most people who have chronic fatigue. So I just want to mention briefly, like, one of the posters in the Long Haul Reset Facebook group had mentioned, and also the last time that I was on a couple of weeks ago before the hurricane in Puerto Rico, there was somebody who had asked a question about the stellate ganglion blocks, and I had never heard of them. Like most doctors, I mean, I brought it up with Dr. Pierre Corey and Dr. Mubin, and they had also never heard of them. And so like most physicians have never heard of these. And so I did a little research on stellate ganglion blocks, and somebody, sent me a bunch of research and told me about his own experience with his son and other people. And so these are like amazing. I mean, I'm just like blown away that I've never heard of them, but they've actually been one of the most effective treatments for a while for PTSD anxiety. And so like up to 75% of PTSD sufferers will have their PTSD resolved, or at least their anxiety portion of it resolved with a stellate ganglion block. So the stellate ganglion is in the neck on both sides, and it's a sympathetic ganglion. So it's a bundle of nerve cells essentially, and it sends like strong sympathetic. So that you have two parts of your nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic arm of your nervous system. So you got to balance these two arms. The sympathetic side is the one that kind of revs you up and gets you excited and helps you fight or flight, typically. So like fight off a lion or run away from the lion. And in the modern world, it's usually like overstimulated by chronic stressors, maybe chronic illness or chronic disease or just like work stress. And then the parasympathetic side is the side that calms you down, helps you rest and digest typically. So, you need it to be activated in order to digest your food properly, in order to go to sleep, in order to rest and recover. And so with long haulers, the sympathetic side is in super overdrive. And this is part of the stellate ganglion will send those sympathetic nervous system, signals, into your brain. And so you block it by injecting a steroid into it and basically like turn it off, and then it kind of resets to normal. So it's kind of gotten like stuck in this like overdrive mode, and it will cause things like anxiety and brain fog and fatigue, because you're just exhausted from being like always on. But it also even does things like disrupt your ability to taste and smell. So people will have weird taste, or they won't be able to taste and smell, or they'll just smell horrible things, not good things. And the kind of the way that one of the researchers described it was that like it's kind of like a signal to like run, get away from this, right? Like go somewhere where you're safe, right? Like, don't eat that, don't like be in this place, this place is dangerous, leave. And so that's like kind of like the overarching like reason that maybe like from a like a story perspective, or like a a reason perspective, like a wisdom perspective, this is happening in your brain, why you're not able to smell, or why it smells really terrible, or why everything tastes really bad. It's like your body's like something is seriously wrong, right? Like, and we got to leave this situation that you're in, although your body's confused because you're not in a situation, it's all in all. But the amazing thing is that like literally within like a minute or something or less, right? Like instantly, sometimes you inject the medication, block the ganglion, and the symptoms disappear like instantaneously. And in one of the case studies, like they injected one side, and I think the person had ringing in the ears, and the ringing in the ears went away on that side immediately. And then they injected the other side, and immediately went away on the other side. And usually the treatment sticks for months, if not years. I mean, the people with PTSD, like it's just that one shot that they need, and they're better. We don't have long enough experience with long haulers to know if it'll last, but I think that it's one avenue that people should explore, especially if they have not been getting better with everything else. And it may just be that like stress thing that your body's creating is not letting you get rid of everything else, right? It's the kind of the root of what's the real problem. It doesn't fix everyone. So like every other avenue of treatment that I've found, it's like somewhere around 80% of people will have their symptoms resolve like by 90% or more when they do this. It's the same thing I've seen with intermittent fasting is, if you just do that, it's like an 80%. And then if you do like the ivermectin, all those protocols from the FLCC, it's around 80% too. If you do, Maraviroc and Pravastatin from IncelDX, a similar rate of like the entire population improving. And so that leaves the other 10 to 20%, right? In all of these different intervention arms, like what do we do for them? Like, do they have something else? Is it not even long COVID? Is it Lyme disease? Is it, Epstein-Barr? Is it something else? Or was it long haul COVID and we improved maybe 20, 30%? And the other 70% is going to be something else. It's like a reactivation of EBV or Lyme or mold toxicity or some other thing, something else that is the problem. And it maybe was triggered by long COVID, but now it has to be dealt with specifically on its own, which is one reason that we're planning to bring on some functional medicine practitioners in the next month or so. That people can, people who want to either optimize their health or just have tried everything else for long haul COVID and they're still not better, or they have resolved most of their long COVID symptoms, but there's still some new symptoms that may be due to some reactivation of some other illness that needs to be discovered, or like some gut dysbiosis or something that's just not responding, even though you fixed everything else, you've gotten stuck at some point. So I don't remember where I started with this, but Michelle, do you want to say anything?
I was just going to add that I think I spoke about this in the last live, but the somatic experiencing from Peter Levine is kind of the same thing as what you're saying. He resets the nervous system through different kind of movements and patterns of movements in the body, and it's this idea that we're in this hyperdrive of sympathetic nervous state that needs to be re-regulated, and it's kind of the same. He'll have people that have so much anxiety that they've never left their yard in something like 5 years, and then he'll just have a few sessions with them and they'll just be completely fine and normal. So it is really if a powerful thing, and I think Peter Levine and he has I think many different practitioners. It's called the Somatic Experiencing Institute, I think, who've worked with him, and that's also, I think something really interesting. And that it's also the kind of thing that, as you said, most people in the modern world are really stressed. So it can have other positive effects aside from just long COVID, like a lot of people are in that state just in their normal day, and you can kind of reset a lot of other things in your body, or maybe niggling health issues you've had for many years can be helped by kind of resetting your nervous system. So I think it's an important one.
The other thing I just want to mention about the stellate ganglion block, it's hard to find somebody who's willing to do it probably for long haul COVID, because they do, interventional pain management will do it for the PTSD. I mean, it's become an accepted treatment for PTSD related anxiety, but it's hard to convince people to do it for some new indication. But if you're having trouble, I forget the name of this person, David something, Petraeus or something, I don't remember, but he is in the Facebook group, and he will send you a list of like research articles, and I have it now. So if people need it, like we can send you all the research studies that you can take to somebody, who does this procedure already, and just show them all the case reports and explain to them why it may be working, and show them, maybe you can find the names of some physicians who have done it for long haulers, and you can have them call those people and just reassure them that this is, the doctor to doctor oftentimes will work better than you showing a doctor's research studies. That usually doesn't work. But if you can find a practitioner who has done it or has some experience in it, and get them on the phone with the guy that you want to do it or the gal that you want to do it, that's probably the best way to convince somebody who's not doing it to go ahead and try it. And the other thing I wanted to say with what are the alternatives if you can't get it done, or it's going to take you, you're going to have to fly somewhere around the world or something to get it done. The other ways to decrease that sympathetic overdrive, which I've also seen, basically are the deep breathing. So breathing exercises, relaxing, calming breathing exercises are the one way that we can reach into our bodies and change our parasympathetic nervous system tone by increasing it. We can build it up over time, and immediately oftentimes you can feel that effect is happening where you're kind of calming down. So you got to find the breathing exercise that works for you, and then keep it up. So some people, I have actually had one long hauler tell me that they had a lot of shortness of breath after this, during due to long haul. And a couple of people actually have told me this. I first heard it from Chris Masterjohn. He himself did this, and he said that he had had this like chronic cough, persistent cough for months after a COVID infection, and it went away in a day after he started breathing exercises. He had read, I think he had maybe read or seen an interview with James Nestor, who's written a book on breathing exercise or just breathing. And I think the thing that worked for him was like James Nestor says that, like, scientifically speaking, quote unquote, like the ideal breath is 5.5 seconds in through your nose and 5.5 seconds out. And so that's what Chris Masterjohn did, and it resolved his chronic cough like basically instantaneously. And then a long hauler that I told about this, he tried it, and I think it was shortness of breath that went away for him. But kind of this persistent shortness of breath that had gone away. And one of the things that I haven't been focusing enough on is the, kind of midway through the pandemic, for acute COVID patients, we started telling them to breathe, right? Like once a day or multiple times a day, do deep breathing to like expand the lower parts of the lungs that get collapsed. And just like a lot of people like never fully expand their lungs. Like they go through their life with their lungs never fully expanded. There's these collapsed areas at the bottoms of their lungs, and it's called atelectasis. And you'll see it oftentimes on chest x-rays. And especially people who are a bit overweight, like it's a little bit harder for them to breathe like fully and like expand their lungs. So you may need to like lie down on your back, like flat without a pillow, in order to like be able to like access the bottom reaches of your lungs. And I mean, I think personally that there's like stuff in there that you need to get out, right? And you need to fully expand it just to like, there's these cilia that beat inside your lungs that like will, there's a small amount of like a slime layer, a minimal slime layer of mucus in your lungs, and these little kind of like there's this wave-like action, these like beating like little tendrils, right, that are like covering all the cells and the lining of your lungs, and they're kind of like beating up towards the top, and they're moving this tiny layer of mucus up and out of your lungs, up, and you kind of swallow it, or if there's a lot of it, you cough it out. And so this is like normal. This is happening all the time. And it's just like stuff collects down there, right? Like you're breathing in from the atmosphere, and there's little particulates and stuff that will collect, and they need to be like removed. But when you're sick, there may be like debris, right, from the illness. There may be like, little bits of COVID virus and stuff that are stuck in there, and you're just never getting them out because you're never expanding that part of the lungs so that you can start, so that those cilia can beat and can, remove the things that are there. So I think that's one way that it's helping, and the other way that it's definitely helping people is just by increasing the tone of their sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. So breathing is one way, and then there's I think the TENS units, these electrical stimulating things. So you can, I think, get a band for your head or something, something in the head and neck area. You can get these devices that will increase vagal tone. So the vagus is the nerve that's the kind of like the main parasympathetic arm of your nervous system. So vagal tone, you'll hear people talk about that when they want to increase the parasympathetic side of their nervous system. So there are these vagal nerve stimulators that you can get, and I don't know anything about like the brands or like which one's good or anything, but that's another way, short of injecting something into the stellate ganglion. But yeah, I mean, yesterday I saw a video of a kid who had like all like horrible, like all the symptoms, right? And they went away, sitting there on the table in the doctor's office, they were gone, right? Like he's able to taste and smell again. And then, they saw that, his anxiety and his depression and his fatigue and his brain fog, everything was basically gone after this one shot. So this may be the thing that some people have been looking for. And I think like we need to get more people, knowing about it. So anything else you wanted to say on this topic?
No. Just the somatic experiencing was the only thing.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Which also reminds me, I also wanted to mention, people might want to try that. The other thing that personally has worked for me, and I've seen work for other people, and so like, I mean, I have one, patient of mine who was like basically incapacitated, like he could not work anymore. And this was pre-COVID, but this was like he had severe anxiety and depression and like really severe psychiatric problems. I think it was even beyond anxiety and depression. It was more like I forget exactly what it was. Maybe like even an element. There might have been an element of like OCD in there as well. I don't remember it clearly, but he was. I mean, the anxiety and depression were so bad that he just wasn't able to work, and so he had stopped working. I mean, he had basically become disabled, entirely just from this, psychiatric issue. And I got him doing what are called the 12 nerve exercises of Qigong. And I mean, it took about 3 months, but like he went back to work and he was like 90% better, and they seem like, when you're doing them, it's like, what is this going to do? It doesn't seem like you're doing anything. There's no like immediate like change for most people, right? When they try them. Um, but qigong is kind of like, it takes a little while to kind of get the hang of it, so like with qigong, and it's kind of hard to find the 12 nerve exercises, but there is one video that I found on YouTube. It's called qigong for beginners, and it's Qigong for beginners dash the 12 nerve exercises, David. So he shows how to do them, and it's like 95% like the way that I learned. So it's basically the same thing. There's some slight differences. So the one kind of like some of the changes that I would make is that like there's this part where you put your hands over your chest like this and kind of like bringing the energy, of your body into this area around the heart. Um, and so the way I learned, so the main thing with qigong that you need to remember is that you got to relax and like don't worry. So like you're trying to like relax at like a really deep level and allow like energy to move through your body, right? And so what is energy? Like people will be like, what's energy? In my body, like what is that? Like is it real? Is it like something that's like in the world, or is it like, something that's doesn't really exist? I mean, is it like woo woo kind of magic stuff? And it's just like, in Chinese medicine, where qigong comes from, ancient China, like it has a lot of meanings, right? Qi, or energy, has a lot of meanings. And I mean, you can think of it like qi flow might just be like blood flow or lymphatic flow or nerve, function, like being transmitted into an area. And so like tension will decrease blood flow into areas, right? And blood brings energy and ATP and oxygen and everything that you need to your body. So that's one way of thinking of it. The other way is that there are bioelectrical like lines of force and action in human beings, and we know that human beings have a bioelectrical field around them, so we create bioelectricity, like low voltage bioelectricity, and there are pathways that correspond, loosely or even very closely to traditional, acupuncture meridians or Chinese medicine meridians. So there literally is the flow of weak energy, systems throughout our body, and there are these lines of force where they flow, and even the acupuncture points are like little. You can find them like energetically speaking, like in the lab, like they literally exist. So those are like different kind of forms of energy that may be affected by just like relaxing. And so qigong, one of the ways that it works is just allowing areas of your body to like relax properly so that things open up and things can move, right, the way that they're supposed to move. Like the fluids in your body can move, blood, lymphatic fluid, venous fluid, and then these little bioelectrical kind of like channels can also move properly. But in order to achieve that, you have to like, you can't be tense, you can't be worried, right? So like you can't be like, oh, am I doing this right, even, right? That itself will kind of create a little bit of like stress, worry. And so like you got to like let go of everything, even like, am I even doing it right? Right? Like sometimes people will be doing it wrong and it still works just because they're not worried about having done it wrong, right? So one way to so that's one, like don't worry. And then the other one is like smile from your heart and kind of try to be happy, right? Because that also helps you kind of relax and get into like the mindset. And then you kind of have to enter like a special frame of mind, right? So like my teacher called it the qigong frame of mind, but it's kind of like a self-hypnosis kind of state. And it's, I mean, there's different ways of explaining it, but like it's kind of got to be like imagine like somebody who's like playing the piano in front of a crowd, right? Like they're kind of like focused, right? They're calm and they're alert and they're focused, and it's kind of like a flow state maybe, and it's kind of like a like if somebody's praying, for example, in a church, right? Like they're in like a kind of a slightly meditative state. It's not like you're like zoned out entirely, it's not like you don't notice anything, but it's like if somebody walked by and like cracked a joke, right? Like you're not in the, or like when you go to like a funeral, right? Like there's a certain way of being in a funeral that's different from like when you go to like a club and you're partying, or you go to somewhere and listen to like comedians crack jokes, right? So like we do this like naturally all the time. Like we have different states of being for different parts of our lives. So like qigong practice is like one of those states where it's like you're not like if somebody comes along and starts talking to you, you're not going to respond to them, right? Like you're in this focused kind of special space, right? Where you are doing this and you're doing it for a reason and you're doing it to benefit yourself. And it's kind of like a meditative movement is what you might call it. So relaxed, lighthearted, happy, but focused on what you're doing, and like, okay, I'm doing this right now, and I'm not like responding to other people who are walking by, or I'm not noticing other things. I'm noticing my body and what I'm doing, and I'm not thinking about work, right? I'm thinking about what I'm doing right now. So that's kind of like mindfulness in the moment, and but you got to be lighthearted, not worry at all about anything, and kind of make it like playful, right? Like I'm enjoying myself. That was the other thing that the teacher said. Like you have to like enjoy yourself, enjoy what you're doing, like have fun here, make it playful, and make it something that you enjoy. Otherwise, you're really not going to keep doing it. That's so those are kind of like the higher level things that you have to kind of get the hang of, and then like the movements, you just have to learn them. And but specifically, I myself found benefit from these. I use them myself. I kind of doubled down on doing them. I had kind of like left them off when I myself had long COVID. So one day we might do like film a class on that, on how to do it the way that I learned it. But I just wanted to tell people about that. You can find it on YouTube. And that's one thing that I wouldn't expect you to, I wouldn't expect it to kick in right away. But if you've tried, again, everything else, even stellate ganglion blocks maybe, and um, the deep breathing, and you've tried like cold exposure, you've tried all the medications and all the herbs and supplements, and you're still like, there's something wrong, you might want to include that. And it only takes like 7 minutes or 5 minutes a day once you learn all the moves, which just take a few days. If you keep doing it for a few days, you'll learn the moves, and then you don't need to watch the video anymore. Um, and then just spend the 5 minutes a day doing it for 3 to 6 months, and see, and keep track of how you feel, and let me know. Let's see. So do we have to continue the qigong for life to avoid anxiety? Yeah, no, I don't think so. I would like continue it, for like, I would overshoot beyond the point where you lose the anxiety. I would continue, say it takes you like 3 months to get rid of this anxiety. I would at least do double that time before I decide to stop doing it. So it's the same with long haul COVID, right? Like symptoms will go away, and then like suddenly people stop doing everything they were doing, and then the symptoms come back. And so this can happen with whatever it was that you did. It may be that you could stop, but I would also continue it for more than just like COVID, because like it can also benefit you in other areas. And it's one of those stress relieving practices. And again, like everyone has stress, even if you don't feel stressed. Everyone experiences stress in life, and we need to include practices in our lives, that traditional cultures had built into them, right? Like, but we have lost all of our kind of, like, a lot of people in the modern world have like completely disconnected from the past, and like all of the kind of practices that one of their, or multiple of their traditional ancestors would have followed in a day-to-day life. And then like we're also disconnected from people, and so like just being in like big like tribal units is like a thing that helps you deal with stress. And sometimes people can't get that back, and so you need to like overload other areas, right? Like doing like a small qigong practice, and doing some breathing practices throughout the day, and other things. So everyone needs to collect some practices that they like, and it might be yoga, it might not be qigong, it might be, there's other meditative movements, it might be tai chi. So like whatever kind of speaks to you and feels good to you, is what I would go for, and what you enjoy doing. Like I love yoga, and it's different than qigong. Qigong is like a gentle, slow movement, and usually, I mean, at least that's one kind of qigong. There's also a seated qigong and a breathing qigong, and there's a bunch of them. But yoga there's a lot of stretching, and that is really like it feels really good when you do it. And so I love yoga. Um, but I know personally that like these 12 nerve exercises work like $1,000,000. So I tell people about them. I have not myself had the same experience with yoga, although I'm sure you can get the same thing from yoga. You just need to go to somebody who has gotten that thing and they can tell you how to do it. And there's different types of yoga too. It's not just stretching. Obviously, there's breathing yoga and all kinds of meditative yogas as well. Let's see. I think this is probably a good place to kind of wrap up. Michelle, any other like comments on that?
No, I mean, I think it's interesting to kind of think of these body work exercises as in a similar way to say if you start taking vitamin C, you're not going to take it, swallow it, and be like, oh, I feel different now. Like it's accumulated over time. Like it affect your immune system is strengthened over time, and it's kind of like that. You're not going to feel calm when you do these 1, 2, 3 movements, but you're basically just resetting your nervous system, and over time that has a huge impact. So kind of sticking with that. And then I think what you said is really important about finding it fun, because then it's a practice that you can just always continue. And with yoga you can find many yogis I know, they just kind of pick maybe 3 or 4 poses that they do every day for a season maybe, or even for a year, and then they're like, okay, now I'm going to do that, and it's just a practice that you do and then change accordingly. So just to find that, because we've sort of lost the ways that we can discharge stress from our body. And Peter Levine has interesting videos about this also, to people to check them out, because he talks about animals, and he has a lot of videos about how animals discharge stress after being chased by predators. And he's like, okay, why do you never see a rabbit with PTSD, or like a fox with anxiety? Like, why doesn't this exist in nature, with other species? Because they have specific ways where they move their body in order to discharge this trauma. And we have kind of lost that. As you said, we've lost rituals, we've lost all of these ancient practices of whatever it is, prayer or movement or dance, or to kind of release that. So just coming up with your specific way that you can kind of continue for your life, I think is really important, beyond like the benefits of long COVID. So
yeah, the other thing that I learned with qigong was there's like you've talked about this kind of ecstatic dance, and qigong also has kind of like an ecstatic dance feature to it. Like there's like this type of qigong which is like a spontaneous movement qigong, which and it's kind of like your body just moves on its own, right? And it's like and you're not directing your movements, they're like happening on their own. And it's kind of like you kind of have to get to that point where that actually happens, and it's kind of difficult to reach for some people, but part of it is like the relaxation, and then you'll find like the energy actually moves on its own in your body, and it kind of like gets you to like move your limbs and your arms and sometimes make noises. And so there's a ritualized version of this called 5 animal play, and it's kind of like the movements of like the eagle, like you're floating around like this. And so sometimes people will learn it as like a ritualized movement, like, and do it in a ritualized way. And there's like the dragon, right? Like the dragon move,
5 rhythms,
right? And these 5 rhythms, and there'll be like the tiger pose and stuff like that. But there's actually like a spontaneous version of this, and a way of doing it where it's like spontaneous. And I actually like got to a point where like I could feel like those kind of like ritualized movements kind of like happening, and they would kind of cycle through those 5, like, so like the energy is moving through 5 organ systems apparently, and they have their own kind of like specific ways of moving your body, right? Your body kind of like, anyway, it's kind of hard to explain, but this does exist in qigong. And the teacher that I had, who was best able to like get people to this level very quickly, was Wong Q Kit. That's WONGQKIEW Kit, KIT. He has a lot of students around the world, but if you can go, like, he used to travel around the world and do these like courses all over the place. And I mean, if you can find him or one of his like top students, like they in their school, like they're really good at explaining like how to get into that spontaneous movement like part of qigong. And so there'll be like a subtle part of it, which they call like flowing breeze, swaying willow or something, which is more of like a very gentle kind of movement that is pretty easy for most people to get to, which is also spontaneous, but it's like much more gentle. And then there's like a more vigorous version of it, which is a little bit harder to achieve, but they are also like oftentimes they can teach it to you in a day, right? Which takes people years to get to on their own, if ever, right? Some people never are able to find that like zone on their own. So maybe why don't you tell us a little bit about spontaneous dance, or what is it, ecstatic dance?
Well, ecstatic dance. Yeah. I mean, ecstatic dance and contact improvisation, which is kind of the dance practice that I practice. I would say that there's kind of two main ways to get to this free flow movement. And there's kind of two breakthroughs. One is, as you said, it's like learning. So 5 rhythms is a good way, or maybe qigong, or there are different practices where you can learn. It's like you're learning a movement language, right? Because we're so stunted in our modern world with the way we exercise in this really repetitive way and the way we move, that we've kind of lost. It's almost like learning a new language. Like you need to learn ways that you can move your body, and kids kind of do this naturally. And if you watch them, they do like really bizarre like movements and make sounds, and they do these kind of things just very naturally, and then we sort of stop doing them. So I think that the classes and the learning is learning the language of how you can move your body and how you can release sounds. And then the second aspect is like the self-censorship aspect of it, which is really hard to overcome, because you're just you feel weird, you feel self-conscious, you're like, this is a weird thing, like so it's learning the language and then stopping yourself censor yourself, and then those two things kind of combined, then you can be in this more like ecstatic dance, or people call it different things, but you're just letting your body move. You're not thinking, oh, I'm moving my arm up. You're just letting your body have an expression. Yeah, but I think it is really beneficial and for the nervous system, and as you said, to get into this flow state where you're not thinking, you're just kind of having an experience and letting your body have an experience. So
yeah, like there like the experience with like qigong is like this kind of like this movement. It's like like it's hard to describe it. It's like you feel like you're being moved, right?
yeah.
Kind of, or like I don't know, like it's hard to explain. It's like your body wants to move this way, right? And it's like your arm wants to go over there, right? And it's kind of like, and it's, I mean, it's like it's your body's moving on its own, and you can stop it. It's not like you're out of control, right? Like you can tell yourself to like, okay, I'm going to stop my arm from moving that way now, but like you can also let it happen. And yeah, so I'm not sure if you have experienced the same thing that I'm trying to like explain, but it's kind of like there's like a subtle force also, like okay, my hand wants to go over there. And the other thing that I think is happening, maybe something related to what like morphic resonance, like Rupert Sheldrake talks about, that there are these like patterns of movement that like many people have done over and over again in the past, and you can kind of like you can join that pattern of movement that like exists across space and time. And so like it's become like an energetic pattern that exists at like a different level of reality. Like it's something invisible. It's like a force field, right? Like we can't see lines of force, right? Like you can detect them, or you can like put iron filings, around a magnet, and then you can see them. But like there are things that are invisible that are real also, right? So there are things that are, you can't see or feel or touch, but they exist, right? Like gravity and like electromagnetic forces. And so there may be like these patterns that can develop in the world, and that you can kind of like attach to, or like get, become a part of, and you can like start to express them. And so um and so like people from the past that you were very similar to, like just emotionally or physically or in whatever way, like you're kind of similar to that person, you may have more of like it might find it easier to like attach to the patterns that they had been doing during their life. So like when I was like when I do qigong, like a lot of like the spontaneous movements, sometimes they look like tai chi, right? Even though
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's not tai chi, or maybe it is. Like some of them are kind of like this is tai chi, and it's like I'm not trying to do it, and it's just like happening on its own, right? And this is kind of like a level that like kung fu and tai chi practitioners, like this is like the thing that they try to achieve, where like they know the movements and they know what they want to do, but they're also making it like where like all of their energy is like in it, where it's like happening on its own kind of. And like when they're fighting, like they want to achieve this state where it's like they're not really thinking about it. It's like their body knows what to do, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, something's coming in, I need to block it. And it's just like it just happens, without a lot of like intellectual kind of like effort. And it also, like when you do it properly, it's like it's different than like just like when you were learning how to do it and you were like, okay, my arm has to move over here. It's like there's more energy in it, right, in your arm than there is normally, right? It's like I don't know, it's kind of hard. It sounds woo woo, although it's not. It's like physical reality, right? It's not some kind of like metaphysical thing, right? It's not something outside of the realm of the physical universe. It is, again, I think it's just like the bioelectrics. It's like just becoming like syncing everything into the movement. So it's not just the muscles that are like in sync with the movement, but it's like the bioelectricity of your body is also like going in that direction and like joining you in the movement, and like your blood is joining you, and like everything is like you're fully there, right? Your brain is there, your mind is there, you're connected, right? Like you're present. And so it's like just, and so the other thing I would say is that like getting back to the question of like how long should I do this, um like the longer you do it, the better you can get at it, and like you can achieve deeper levels of anything, right? And so this is like the way human beings kind of used to view things, right? And you find this still a lot in places like Japan, where they like try to perfect the thing that they've been doing for 50 years, and they still try to do it even better than they're doing it, right? And you can continue this like journey towards like perfection. Like it's a never ending journey of like becoming better and better and better and better, and like there's no end to like how much better you can get, or like how much deeper you can go in any of these practices, right? There's like deeper and deeper
Mm.
levels that you can excavate in meditation, or in meditative movement, or in like cutting a fish, or pouring tea. There's like you can find deeper levels of it where you can become more and more present in the moment. And it's not always about like physically doing it better, but just like finding deeper like emotional or spiritual, or just like deeper levels inside you of like being in it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it is kind of hard to explain, but
And
that's
those
part
come
of
out
why.
naturally.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and it's part of why it's not, it doesn't become boring, or like you don't like, you gotta again find the thing that you enjoy doing, and then like why would you stop doing something you enjoy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the question. Like this is something that you actually like, and it's not just something that you're doing to get rid of your anxiety, but eventually you have to like notice how else is it like it's actually enjoyable in itself. And actually, like if you notice, you'll see that like your life gets better because of it. And it's not just that the anxiety is gone, but like then you reach another level of like I'm actually more joyous, right? And then I'm even more joyful, and then I'm even more calm, and I'm even more like present, and my work is even better, and my relationships are even better because of this thing that I'm doing, and they keep getting better. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what people have to try to like look for a little bit, and you don't want to try to force it. That's one of the things that gets in the way of it. Like they'll talk about this in Eastern kind of philosophy, that like especially in China, that like if you're like trying too hard to do the
Mm-hmm.
thing, then it kind of gets in the way of actually achieving it. So that's part of like where you got to go back to like just enjoy yourself, relax, don't worry about like what I'm trying to do here, what I'm trying to achieve, I'm trying to like get to this thing. Just kind of enjoy yourself, and don't think about that, and just like be in the moment, and
Mm.
enjoy it. And a lot of it's kind of like self-talk, right? Like, oh, this is like I have to do this, right? Like you got to get away from that, like I have to do it, right? And it's like a burden on me, because like now I'm like one of those people who can't live a normal life without doing qigong every day, or something. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
all different kinds of things that people will tell themselves to make them feel bad about the thing that they enjoy, maybe, right? And then like convince themselves to stop doing the thing. So I think those are some thoughts. What do you think?
And I think boredom, breaking through that also. I think I told you the story of when I did this 24-hour silent contact improvisation weekend, where we did 12 hours of silent dance and then the next day 12 hours. And I was just like, oh my God, how am I going to get through this? Is so boring. And it was in silence, no music and no speaking to other people. So, and it's crazy because maybe after 20 minutes, you start to feel a bit bored and then you think, wow, I have 11 hours to go. But there are just more and more layers that keep going, like you peak on the boredom and then something else happens and then you enter another state and you're just on this constant journey. And, in the context of this dance practice, when you have a lot of time, one thing that happens is that you dance with other people who you wouldn't usually dance with. Like generally I avoid like grandmas because I don't want to have a boring dance when it's just a 1 hour jam. I'm like, this is going to be boring. I want to have fun and fly and be thrown and lifted and all these kind of things. But when you have 12 hours, it's like, oh, I have time for this old lady. Like, what kind of dance are we going to do? Like, okay, we'll do a finger dance. We'll do like a toe dance for half an hour because there's time for it, and then you're like, wow, toe dances are super interesting, actually. Like I missed something important because I was always trying to have the most fun dance possible. And then, like you'll do a dance of just lying on your back maybe for half an hour and moving your spine. Has it okay, your picture froze for a second. Yeah, but anyway, the idea is that there's always new layers to reach. And the most important thing is kind of committing to the practice without having an outcome in mind. So it's not, you're not always thinking of the end goal. You're just kind of committing and committing and committing over and over, and then just noticing what comes from that. And I think that is kind of the key of continuing without feeling like this isn't working for me, because you have no expectation or end goal. You're just kind of committing to this practice, knowing that it's going to kind of give birth to new things as time goes on. So
cool. Yeah, so hopefully we didn't go like too deep onto like too few questions, but yeah, I mean, we just took it wherever it led us today. And I hope this was beneficial for people. I'll try to get back to like a full Q&A probably next week, maybe sooner. We'll see when I'm able to do that, but definitely next Wednesday, if not sooner. I'll try to do like a full hour of a Q&A. And hopefully people enjoyed this and benefited from it. And thanks, Michelle, for spending 2 hours plus with me on this.
It was good. Thank you.
All right. Hopefully we'll see everyone back here next week. And thanks for joining us. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.